Inside the Laugh in the Dark ride at Long Beach New Pike in 1976, a rigid figure hung from a noose, covered in layers of neon orange paint. For 4 years, park visitors had passed it by, assuming it was just another hokey, wax-coated prop. In December, a camera crew for The $6 Million Man arrived to film an episode titled Carnival of Spies. While prepping the grand finale scene, workers began clearing space inside the funhouse, moving what they thought were mannequins. When one crew member attempted to move the hanging dummy, the arm abruptly snapped off at the elbow and fell to the floor. Looking down at the brake, the crew didn't see wood or wire. Beneath the neon paint was a cross-section of real human bone and muscle. The discovery immediately shut down the set. What began as a routine location shoot for a TV show had just opened a bizarre, decades-old homicide investigation. The remains were sent to the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, where medical examiners discovered a body that was completely mummified and hard as stone. This timeline plots his preservation. The tissue was saturated with arsenic, an embalming technique popular during the Civil War. Inside the jaw, investigators found a 1924 penny. The cause of death was a pre-World War II .32-20 caliber bullet, fixing his death in the early 1900s. After news of the forensic evidence reached Oklahoma, a group of amateur historians in Guthrie realized the description matched a local outlaw. Using photo superimposition and records of existing scars, they positively identified the body as Elmer McCurdy. The modern autopsy hadn't uncovered a recent murder, but rather solved a 65-year-old cold case of a forgotten American bandit. In 1911, Elmer McCurdy was a bumbling criminal with a dangerous, inept fondness for explosives. He frequently used far too much nitroglycerin, once blowing up a safe with such force that the silver coins fused to the floor, leaving him with nothing. His final robbery was a total disaster. He and his cohorts set out to intercept a train carrying a $400,000 payroll, but they accidentally targeted a standard passenger train instead. McCurdy was eventually tracked down by a sheriff's posse and killed in a shootout. His entire take for the final robbery was $46 and 2 jugs of whiskey. In life, McCurdy was an absolute failure. His criminal career was remarkably short, largely unprofitable, and completely unnoteworthy. After his death, a local undertaker pumped McCurdy full of arsenic and put him on display in the funeral home. He charged visitors a nickel to see the bandit who wouldn't give up, placing the coins directly into the mummy's mouth. In 1916, 2 carnival promoters posing as McCurdy's relatives successfully tricked the undertaker into releasing the body, launching the Outlaw's bizarre posthumous nationwide tour. For decades, McCurdy's remains were dragged through the American sideshow circuit and featured in wax museums. He even appeared in theater lobbies to help market exploitation films about the dangers of drug addiction. Eventually, the aging corpse was used as collateral for a loan before ending up in the hands of the Long Beach Amusement Company. Forgotten and unrecognizable, he was painted in day-glow red and hung from a rope inside the funhouse. While McCurdy was a failure in life, he achieved a strange geographic reach in death, becoming a highly profitable commercial asset for over half a century. In 1977, the historians from Guthrie, Oklahoma, successfully petitioned to bring McCurdy home for a proper burial. A solemn funeral procession utilized a vintage 1918 glass-sided hearse to carry the remains to the Boot Hill section of the Summit View Cemetery. To ensure he stayed buried, the attending undertaker ordered 2 cubic yards of solid cement to be poured directly over the casket. The measure was intended to permanently end McCurdy's 65-year career as a traveling sideshow attraction. America's morbid fascination with true crime ultimately turned the most incompetent outlaw of the Wild West into a permanent, commercialized fixture of the macabre. Docked quietly in Long Beach Harbor under the cover of midnight, the RMS Queen Mary sits completely still. It has remained a stationary museum and hotel since 1967, yet Time magazine lists this retired vessel as one of the top 10 haunted places in the world. During its active years as an ocean liner, over 49 documented fatalities occurred on board. The sheer volume of reported anomalous phenomena grew so large that in the early 1990s, the company managing the ship brought in a professional parapsychologist, Christopher Chaikin, to conduct an extensive scientific investigation into the activity. To understand why a stationary museum generates this much reported activity, we have to look past the ghost stories and map the physical, historical tragedies of the ship itself. This cross-section maps the 49 onboard deaths. They cluster tightly in localized hotspots across the vessel's internal layout. Deep in the ship lies the engine room, where visitors report a young man dissolving into mist near a steel bulkhead known as Door 13. The history matches the reports. During a routine drill, an 18-year-old crew member was caught and crushed to death by that massive steel hatch. Moving up to the first-class indoor pool, guests and staff describe the apparition of a young girl they call Scary Mary, often accompanied by spectral wet footprints appearing on the dry tile. The pool area is tethered to several specific real-world tragedies, including a young girl who actually drowned here, and a ship's officer who fatally mistook a bottle of poison for gin. In Cabin B340, reports go beyond standard noises to violent disturbances, vintage faucets opening independently, and sudden ice frost crystallizing over the wood paneling. The physical phenomena grew so severe that management actually locked the cabin up for decades before finally reopening it to tourists. The parapsychological echoes recorded across the ship directly correlate with precise physical locations where documented sudden deaths occurred. But the internal casualties are a fraction of the ship's history. The Queen Mary began as a British luxury ocean liner, built over years and finally launching in 1934. Taking her maiden voyage in 1936, she spent 3 years ferrying passengers across the Atlantic, faster and in greater comfort than any ship before her. When World War II broke out, the British government immediately drafted the ship. The luxury fittings were stripped out, and the hull was painted a flat, drab gray. Nicknamed the Gray Ghost, she leveraged her exceptional speed. In 1942, while zigzagging through hostile waters, the Queen Mary collided directly with the HMS Curacoa, an escort ship that had crossed her path. Under strict orders not to stop for any reason, the massive ocean liner cut the escort vessel in half. 337 men died in the water. The atmosphere inside the Queen Mary today sits on top of this foundational trauma. The ship was an active instrument of war, surrounded by mass casualty. After the war ended, the vessel was refitted and returned to passenger service in 1947, completing a total of 1,001 transatlantic voyages. She resumed her elite status on the water, hosting high-profile Hollywood actors, famous musicians, and even the British royal family. Her active life cycle concluded in 1967, completing her final passage and permanently anchoring in Southern California. The Queen Mary stands as a floating time capsule. The shadows reported in its lower decks and empty pools stem from a vessel that absorbed both the peak glamour and the highest costs of the 20th century. It was midnight in December 1918, along the dark, fog-choked shoreline of Long Beach, California. Sleepless residents and naval personnel gazing out over the Pacific suddenly spotted a sequence of neon green and blue lights out over the water, moving in deliberate rhythmic arcs. While standard maritime lanterns or flares cast a familiar white glare, these glows possessed a strange ethereal quality, reportedly floating just above the crests of the waves before sweeping inward across the damp sand. Assuming this was a military threat or a signaling device from an enemy vessel, nearby naval defense installations immediately swung into action. They turned their massive anti-aircraft searchlights toward the water, cutting intense white beams through the night sky to pinpoint the source. Even as the military spotlights crisscrossed the horizon, they found nothing. No physical craft, vessel, or aircraft was ever detected. The green and blue glows simply danced across the water, indifferent to the military effort, before fading into the darkness. To understand why this silent light show triggered such immediate alarm, we have to look at the people watching from the shore. World War I had officially ended just weeks prior, leaving the coastal population with a heavy psychological toll and acute paranoia regarding enemy submarines. Simultaneously, a second crisis was tearing through Southern California. The lethal second wave of the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic was shutting down public venues, forcing residents behind gauze masks and filling the city with an ambient sense of dread. The origin of these persistent dancing lights remains officially unsolved. Over the decades, historians and oceanographers have narrowed the possibilities down to three primary theories. It was a unique historical flashpoint, an unexplained physical phenomenon appearing directly in front of a society already pushed to its psychological limit. The first analytical lens focuses on the natural mechanics of marine biology and Southern California's coastal environment. Southern California experiences periodic blooms of microscopic dinoflagellates, often called red tides. When disturbed by crashing waves or underwater currents, these organisms emit a brilliant, cold neon blue or green light. However, reports from 1918 consistently described the lights floating in the air, while standard bioluminescence remains bound to the surface of the water. This suggests an atmospheric phenomenon known as a superior mirage, or fata morgana. On cold December nights, warm air rests directly over the cool ocean water. This inversion acts as a giant optical lens, bending light and projecting glowing waves upward, making them float. Under this scientific lens, the phantom lights were a rare alignment of microscopic life and atmospheric optics. The second theory considers the heavy United States military footprint in the local harbor at the time. Coastal defense units were actively testing new technologies, including high-intensity colored arc lamps, maritime signaling tools, and searchlight filters. It is possible the military was conducting undisclosed, experimental offshore signaling exercises, using green and blue lenses that night. From this perspective, the lights were simply a classified maritime test that terrified civilians were never meant to understand. The final lens turns away from the physical world and toward the exhausted minds of the 1918 Long Beach public. Months of fearing enemy submarines, combined with the claustrophobia of a deadly pandemic, created a societal state of hypervigilance where human perception becomes easily influenced. The coast was regularly dotted with mundane light sources, standard boat lanterns, lighthouse sweeps, or stars sitting low on the horizon. Heavy coastal fog can diffuse and distort these everyday lights, stripping them of recognizable shapes or clear origins. A traumatized population can collectively exaggerate a distorted light source into a menacing, otherworldly event. The psychological lens suggests the anomaly resided within the highly suggestible, traumatized minds of the coastal residents. The truth likely exists at the intersection of all three theories. A routine military test or a natural occurrence was likely amplified by a society already pushed to its breaking point. Today, modern radar and constant digital monitoring have stripped the ocean of much of its immediate mystery. But a century ago, the ocean felt vast and unmonitored. To the people living near the Long Beach Pavilion, the Pacific was a dark, unknowable space. All it took was a few unexplained flashes of color on a December night to ignite the imagination of an entire city. The 1918 Phantom Light Show remains a timeless reminder of an era when humanity's deepest fears could easily manifest in the dark waters just off the shore. Every city carries a quiet inventory of ghost stories, but few in Long Beach evoke as much visceral horror as the legend of Igor's Alley. To understand the myth, you have to imagine stepping off a well-lit street into a narrow 1930s industrial passage where coastal fog is thick enough to swallow the light. Local lore centers on a man named Igor, an immigrant laborer living in a small home adjacent to the alley. Like millions during the Great Depression, Igor saw his life shattered by sudden, desperate poverty. According to the story, the loss of his job drove him into a severe, alcohol-fueled psychosis. After spending his last meager paycheck at a local tavern, he returned home near midnight in a state of total despair. That night, he committed an unspeakable act, murdering his wife and 2 young children. The grimmest detail of the legend claims Igor carried the bodies into the narrow alleyway and hoisted them high into the air, hanging them from rusted metal meat hooks installed near an upper window. What became of Igor remains a mystery. Some say he fled into the foggy night, while others believe he ended his own life in that same passage. Regardless, this horrifying act became the foundation for a multi-generational cautionary tale whispered across Long Beach high schools and campfires. Over the decades, the narrow passageway gained a reputation for disturbing phenomena. Modern visitors claim a heavy, unnatural mist frequently rolls through the passage, enveloping the alley even when surrounding streets remain clear. Others report auditory echoes at the stroke of midnight, the faint, rhythmic sound of heavy boots on asphalt, followed by the metallic clinking of heavy chains or meat hooks swinging overhead. The most famous claim involves a phantom touch. Local youths dare one another to stand directly beneath the spot where the hooks allegedly hung, to feel a sudden temperature drop or the unsettling sensation of small feet brushing against the top of their heads. These accounts have made Igor's Alley a landmark for the paranormal, but we have to ask, is this passage truly haunted by a historical tragedy, or is there a deeper explanation? Tell us about your local urban legends in the comments, and subscribe as we look for the truth. If a crime this horrific actually occurred, the records would be easy to find. Yet when local historians combed through city archives, police ledgers, and newspaper reports from the 1930s, they found no record of any such triple murder occurring in Long Beach. If the murder is a fiction, the legend's physical evidence must have another source. To find it, we must look at the unique architecture of older Long Beach industrial buildings. Many brick structures feature old pulley systems like this one. These iron winches served the practical purpose of moving heavy goods to upper-story windows. When viewed through thick coastal fog at night, the distinctive shape of a pulley hoist is easily distorted. These standard industrial pulleys, transformed into sinister silhouettes by the nighttime weather, provided the meat hooks that eventually anchored the ghost story. Beyond the optical illusions, the myth of Igor persisted because it served a vital social purpose for families in the neighborhood. In the 1930s, industrial areas near shipping channels were full of physical dangers for children, like unlit pits, massive heavy machinery, and fast-moving freight. Parents and older siblings deliberately used the creepy environment to their advantage, inventing the monster Igor to enforce strict curfews and keep children away from these hazards. The threat of a killer waiting in the fog was highly effective. It ensured that misbehaving children stayed out of these dark, dangerous passages. Igor functioned as a community-enforced security system, a boogeyman wrapped in a ghost story to protect children from the real-world waterfront dangers. While the murder was a myth, the atmosphere of dread was grounded in reality. During the 1930s, a blanket of severe economic despair covered Long Beach, leaving thousands of families in a state of constant, high-stakes anxiety. The Great Depression took a heavy psychological toll. Sudden poverty and the threat of family collapse were real-world terrors that every household in the district understood. These abstract, overwhelming fears, the loss of a home, the disintegration of the family, found a face in the legend of Igor. By localizing the era's collective trauma in a single terrifying character, the community created a way to process the invisible anxieties of the decade. The myth has survived because it successfully fused that historical trauma with the local architecture and the ever-present coastal fog. It ultimately gave the dark memory of the Depression a permanent home in the alleyways of Long Beach. Igor's Alley remains a classic scare dare, yet the most persistent ghosts haunting the passage are the enduring echoes of the Great Depression itself. Thanks for watching. Make sure to like and subscribe for more stories from the edge of history.